I tried last week to create some sense, first of all, of what social ecology was and what some of its premises were. And when it came down to working out or heading toward developing what you would call an ethics, I went through a great deal of natural evolution, as you will remember, and tried to show what meaning there was in the organic evolutionary process. What I would like to do today is continue that to some extent, and perhaps go into other issues as well, given time, and examine the social process that emerges out of this biological process, both the continuities and discontinuities that exist between what can be called natural evolution and social evolution, and what meaning can be given to social evolution. The meaning that I try to give to natural evolution is that if one can see any kind of development that lends itself to rational interpretation in the evolution of organisms, from our lowly amoeba all the way up to our sublime primates, this was the development of self-consciousness of mind. That is to say, going from the most elementary forms of sensibility, identity, as you might find in an amoeba, all the way through to self-consciousness, intellectuation, you'll recall my steps, and finally, reason. And only human beings, and I say they are unique in this respect, are capable of reasoning on a level of generality that makes them creative to an unlimited extent, where most animals adapt, and that is the primary function from an evolutionary standpoint of various mutations, changes, elaborations in the evolutionary tree, as it were, as it flourishes and flowers out clear through from the Paleozoic all the way up to the Cenozoic, that we have seen an ever greater development of consciousness, intellectuation, and the rudiments of mind. And by mind, I mean reason in a human sense. That is to say, the ability to flexibly create one's environment, and that human beings are constituted by natural evolution itself to intervene in the environment, not simply to adapt to it, not simply to find a niche in the environment, a secure way of living, but also to change it. That's what is unique about human beings, using their rationality such that the environment is suitable for them, not leaving it up to evolution to make them suitable for changes in the environment. Now that is an enormous qualitative step. It's a qualitative difference. It does not mean that the world was made for us. It wasn't made for anyone. In fact, it wasn't made. It evolved, cosmically speaking, over billions of years. It doesn't mean that we can or should be cruel to animals. It doesn't mean that we, quotes, should dominate them in any sense over and beyond what our simple needs are, and you can argue about the wisdom of eating meat or not, and so on and so forth. And animal power is very, very important, together with human labor power, for thousands and thousands of years in cultivating this planet and making it possible for us to sit and talk about what should be done with this planet or how we fit into it. So that human beings, if one were to ask what their place is in the natural world, recognizing that by the natural world we're talking about evolution, nature as we understand it, as we are talking about it, is evolution. Otherwise, the word nature dissolves into being anything. Anything that contains molecules, and that is anything as such, or atoms, or electrons, protons, neutrons, etc., that would be nature. If one goes beyond that notion of nature as being more than just that which exists, we are talking about the biosphere. And when we talk about the biosphere, we are talking about its evolution. Otherwise, the word nature becomes so big, so promiscuous as it was, so, quotes, universal as to become almost vacuous. It becomes the being that is nothing. So we are talking, when we speak of the natural world, or when we speak of the biosphere, we're talking of its evolution. And it is always evolving. The image of a beautiful scene as we stand on a mountaintop or look at a site set aside for visitors and tourists and whatever you want to national parks and the like, that scene is deceptive. Nature is never frozen in that sense. It is always evolving, and even as we look at it and it seems to be static, there are changes going on that may not be perceivable to us at that given moment, but over a period of time would indicate that they are at times very, very far-reaching. Soil, mountains are being eroded, valleys are being formed, rivers are changing, life forms are undergoing change, particularly on the microbial level and so forth. The soil is changing. This is going on every second, so that the frozen image that the picture postcard gives us, when one expands with great passion and speaks of, the beauties of nature, are forever changing, are forever evolving. And the point that I've tried to demonstrate, or at least argue, last week was that this change has been toward ever greater consciousness, sensibility, consciousness, intellectuation, and finally rationality, which we at long last are potentially capable of exercising to an extent that no other life form can even match, however intelligent many life forms may be. And that expresses itself in our creativity, not simply in our adaptability, which is what marks most life forms. They adapt to their environments. Since we have been organized by natural evolution to intervene, as I told you, this is not a sinister plot by social ecologists to create people who meddle in the natural world all the time. This is the product of millions and millions of years of evolution, involving changing simple rock forms into weapons or into cutting tools or whatever you like. We have also evolved in a way that has opened a new area of evolution, a second nature. This new area of evolution is sociocultural. What we have done is created out of whatever tendencies certain animals have to group together to form some kind of communities. The most basic, I may tell you, or nuclear, is frankly the mother-child relationship. What has happened is that we have elaborated whatever apparatus we have, genetically or otherwise, a new realm of development that is not strictly biological, and in fact whose essence is to become less and less biological, which does not mean that we can ever escape from our biology. This is the realm of social relations, and very specifically, and this is what makes human communities different from any other animal community, we establish institutions. That is to say, we don't simply have animals grouping together, and we can get into a whole discussion on who's going to be dominant and who's going to be submissive in various kinds of animal groups. So remember that possibly 50% of all the animals we talk about do not form groups at all. Most cats are not social. Leopards are not social. They are solitary animals. Lions form prides, but they are almost rare by comparison with all the other felines that exist in the wild. And even your domestic house cat is basically not a social animal. That doesn't mean that these animals don't try to communicate with each other in a sense for sexual reasons. It doesn't mean that they might interact with each other because of territorial reasons. All of these things are true. But they do not form even the most elementary types of communities when we speak of the kind that we speak of when we refer, say, to the behavior of deer, or when we talk of herds of bison. They don't do that at all. So you would have to write off even certain primates like the orangutan, which is a solitary ape and is a genuine ape and is part of our hominoid lineage, our lineage of human-like primates, diverging from us I don't know how many millions of years ago, but still part of that lineage. So, the remarkable thing about human beings is not simply that they form herds like zebras or bison or musk oxen or whatever you like. It's not simply that they form even communities like apes that seem to have a measure of stability, although that measure is very fragile. But what human beings do is that they go beyond the formation of groups into the formation of institutions. Now this is remarkable. An institution is a distinct way of organizing your interaction with other members of your species, and more specifically, other members of your group. And not only is it a distinct way of doing so, almost to use the word in the most expanded fashion, a kind of social contract, it is also a way of interacting in a mutable way. You can change institutions. We all know that families have a history, that there have been, well, according to some theorists, group families, extended families, matriarchal, or if more precisely, matricentric families, patricentric families, patriarchal families, nuclear families. And here we're talking at the most basic level of the biosocial relationships that people establish, involving how children are raised, involving how the two sexes interact with each other, what their rights and duties are. All of these have been modified over thousands of years. Here's an institution, which we call marriage, which is extremely variable. This becomes even more, far more flexible as we start getting into ways of administering societies. We have bands at the most elementary level, where perhaps 10 or even less people seem to form a kind of community, an extended family, as it were. And they are based on kinship. What makes you a member of a band is the fact that you are related to a common ancestor. Whether that relationship is real or fictitious is not the point. The point is that there is a belief that you are related to a common ancestor. And very frequently, and certainly at one point or another, early on in the prehistory of humanity, that common ancestry was very real. It was not fictitious. Then afterward, we have tribes. And we form clans in these tribes. And there too, the kinship relationship is very pronounced, the blood tie. And people who do not have a shared blood tie with us, be it fictitious or be it real, are regarded as outsiders. They're inorganic, is the way in which Marx put it. They may become participants in the community. They may even be brought in as members through various rituals, including such childish rituals as, or at least what we today regard as childish rituals, namely mixing blood by pricking your skin. So you had tribal organizations, and these tribal organizations emerging out of band organizations were themselves very mutable. They began to form tribal federations. The tribal federations, in turn, began to become increasingly more and more like nations, and they began to have increasingly national institutions. And these might include monarchs early on, emerging out of chieftains, or you had cities which had citizenship and admitted people according to certain oaths or according to a system of rights and duties. So these institutions were very mutable, and ultimately some of them graduated from autocracies into oligarchies and finally into variously democracies and republics. I can go on with every institution you can possibly think of. So now we are talking of the following. We're talking of ways in which human beings interact such that no animal does, namely by forming institutions which no animal does. Even if you believe that everywhere in the animal world you have relations of dominance and submission, you're always talking about individual dominant animals or individual submissive animals, but you're not talking about institutions. The relationship changes according to whether or not the animal lives or dies, be it dominant or submissive. With institutions, on the other hand, you have something that is being preserved irrespective of whether or not a king or a president or a commissar or whatever you like lives or dies. That doesn't change. So what is remarkable about human social evolution is that you see an evolution of institutions. And the community that human beings establish differs profoundly. This new second nature, which now undergoes an evolution of its own, or a development of its own, or a history of its own, use whatever words you want, undergoes a development of its own, an elaboration of its own, on grounds that are fundamentally different from the kind of evolution you see in the natural world. The real question that one faces is this: if this animal called a human being, normal human being, is potentially capable of being rational, potentially capable of being creative, potentially capable of changing his or her environment such as no other animal creature can do, then will that animal, or can that animal, or should that animal create institutions that are themselves rational as well? In other words, should this second nature, this evolution, live up to the basic capacity that makes human beings unique, namely their capacity to be rational and self-conscious? Now, that doesn't mean, when I speak of capacity and potentiality, that they are at any given time rational or self-conscious. They may be totally irrational. They may be totally blind to their own awareness or their own abilities. And we recognize that in ordinary discourse. We often say, oh, this woman or this man or this child, male or female, whatever, has not lived up to his or her capacities. What a waste. Has not had the opportunity to be this or that type of person, fulfill him or herself. In ordinary discourse, we are always mindful of the potentialities of the individual to fulfill himself or herself. And the famous elegy in a country churchyard by, is it Gray, if my memory is correct, that here lieth a shoemaker who could have been a great general. Well, your standards may change from those of Gray. Or here lieth a seamstress who could have been a philosopher, whatever you like. is an expression of the fact that human beings have potentialities, be they as individuals or as a species, which may not be fulfilled, but which are latent. And the compelling obligation, in a sense, of the whole human experiment or experience, if you want, on this planet is, will human beings, as potentially rational beings, fulfill themselves in a rational society? And that compels us to examine what the heck do we mean by the word rational society. What is a rational society? This is a very unpopular question because now we're not supposed to believe in reason. We're supposed to believe in intuition. It's unpopular because it asks a very demanding question. By what standards are you going to judge what is rational? Is a democracy rational? Is capitalism rational? Is egotism rational? By what standards are you going to judge this? And here we must go back again and examine something not only about the evolution of amoebas, but the evolution of human beings.